Human history is often defined by wars, kings, and revolutions. But the truth is, the biggest killers in history haven't been soldiers holding swords or guns.
They have been microscopic, invisible enemies floating in the air we breathe and the water we drink.
But we aren't just talking about the flu or a common cold here.
We're talking about outbreaks so bizarre, so terrifying, and so inexplicable that they sound like the plot of a science fiction horror movie.
Did you know there was a plague that forced people to dance until they died? Or a disease that turned living people into frozen statues for decades? Or a virus that made entire villages succumb to uncontrollable laughter? Today, we are diving deep into the medical history books to uncover 15 of the most interesting, terrifying, and downright weird facts about disease outbreaks. Welcome to the dark side of biology. Fact 1. The Dancing Plague of 1518. Let's start with one of the strangest events in human history. Imagine walking down a street in Strasbourg, France, in July 1518. You see a woman named Frau Trophia step out of her house and begin to dance. There is no music. There is no celebration. She is just twisting, twirling, and shaking. She didn't stop. She danced for hours until her feet were bloody and her face was soaked in sweat. She collapsed from exhaustion, slept for a few hours, woke up, and immediately started dancing again. Within a week, 34 others had joined her. Within a month, there were 400 people in the streets, dancing uncontrollably. This wasn't a flash mob. These people were terrified. They were screaming in pain, begging for mercy, but their legs wouldn't stop moving. The city council, completely baffled, made a fatal error. They asked local physicians for advice, who claimed the victims had overheated blood. The prescription? More dancing. The city actually hired musicians and built a wooden stage in the market square, believing the victims just needed to dance it out of their systems. It backfired. The music only encouraged more people to join in. Dozens died from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. To this day, historians debate whether it was a reaction to a toxic mold called ergot found in their bread, or a case of mass psychogenic illness caused by the extreme stress of famine. Either way, they literally danced themselves to death. Fact 2. The Cocolitli epidemics. When we talk about the fall of the Aztec Empire, we usually blame smallpox brought by the Spanish conquistadors. And while smallpox was devastating, there was something else, something much darker, lurking in Mexico in the 16th century. The Aztecs called it Cocolitli, which simply means the pestilence. Between 1545 and 1576, this mysterious outbreak killed an estimated 15 million people, wiping out nearly 80% of the remaining native population. But it wasn't smallpox. The symptoms were horrific. Historical accounts describe high fevers, a black tongue, and severe vertigo. But the hallmark symptom was bleeding. Victims would bleed profusely from the nose, the eyes, and the mouth. Death usually occurred within 3 to 4 days of the first symptom. For centuries, no one knew what Cocolitli actually was. It remained a biological cold case. It wasn't until 2018, just a few years ago, that scientists extracted DNA from the teeth of victims buried in a mass grave in Oaxaca. They found traces of a rare subspecies of Salmonella. It turns out, this wasn't just a war with the Spanish. It was a biological apocalypse likely worsened by the worst drought in North American history, which forced rodents, and their bacteria, into human settlements. Fact 3. The living statues, encephalitis lethargica. If you think zombies are fiction, think again. In roughly the same years that the Spanish flu was ravaging the world, another, much creepier epidemic quietly spread across the globe. It was called encephalitis lethargica, or the sleepy sickness. It infected nearly 5 million people. Some died quickly, but others suffered a fate worse than death. The virus attacked the brain, leaving victims trapped in a state of suspended animation. They were conscious and aware of their surroundings, but they were physically unable to move or speak. They were living statues, frozen in time. Many of these patients were institutionalized and forgotten, sitting motionless in hospital corridors for decades. It wasn't until the late 1960s that the neurologist Oliver Sacks administered a new drug called L-Dopa to these patients. The results were miraculous. Patients who hadn't moved or spoken since the 1920s suddenly woke up. They talked, laughed, and walked around, rediscovering a world that had moved on 40 years without them. Tragically, the effects of the drug were temporary. After a brief window of life, most of the patients slipped back into their frozen states, where they remained until they died. The virus vanished as mysteriously as it arrived, and scientists still aren't 100% sure what caused it. Fact 4. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic. We say that laughter is contagious, but in 1962, in what is now Tanzania, that phrase became a literal medical diagnosis. It started on January 30th at a boarding school for girls in the village of Kashasha. 3 girls started laughing. They were giggling at a joke, but then they couldn't stop. The laughter spread to their classmates. Within hours, 95 of the 159 students were struck by uncontrollable fits of laughter. And this wasn't happy laughter. It was hysterical, tear-inducing, painful laughter that lasted for hours or even days. It made it impossible to eat, sleep, or study. The school was forced to close because the students were incapacitated. But sending the kids home just spread the virus. The laughter jumped to the girls' home villages, infecting their mothers and fathers. Over the next few months, more than 1,000 people in the region were affected. 14 schools had to be shut down. So, what happened? Was it a virus? A gas leak? No. Sociologists concluded it was a case of mass psychogenic illness. The girls were under immense pressure from strict teachers and the uncertainty of their country's newfound independence. The laughter was actually a stress response that cascaded through the community like a row of dominoes. It proves that sometimes, the most contagious thing on Earth isn't a germ. It's an idea. Fact 5. The first biological weapon, Siege of Kaffa. We tend to think of biological warfare as a modern invention, something involving labs and test tubes. But one of the most significant disease outbreaks in history started with a catapult in the year 1346. The Mongol army, led by Yanni Beg, was laying siege to the Genoese trading port of Kaffa in Crimea. But the Mongol army had a problem. They were dying. A mysterious illness was sweeping through their camp, causing boils and rapid death. They were losing the war to disease. In a final act of spite, Yanni Beg ordered his men to load the infected corpses of their dead soldiers onto catapults. They launched the plague-ridden bodies over the city walls of Kaffa. The rotting bodies landed in the streets, spreading the bacteria Yersinia pestis to the Italians inside. Panic ensued. The Genoese sailors fled Kaffa on their ships, sailing back to Italy. But they didn't go alone. They carried the bacteria and the rats that carried the fleas with them. When those ships docked in Sicily, they unleashed the Black Death onto Europe. That single act of medieval biological warfare sparked a pandemic that would eventually kill 50 million people, half the population of Europe. Fact 6. The island that caught strangers. Imagine living in a place so isolated that the common cold is a major medical event. That was life on St. Kilda, a tiny, remote archipelago off the coast of Scotland. For centuries, the small population lived in almost total isolation. Because they were never exposed to the outside world, they had almost zero immunity to common germs. Every time a boat from the mainland visited to trade, the islanders knew what was coming. They called it Natin na Gal, or the stranger's cough. Within days of a ship arriving, almost every single person on the island would come down with a severe respiratory illness. It didn't matter if the sailors on the ship were healthy. Just carrying the latent germs on their clothes or breath was enough to incapacitate the entire island population. It's a stark reminder of how much our daily health relies on the constant, invisible exchange of microbes that keeps our immune systems alert. Fact 7. The man who was jailed for washing his hands. Today, the first thing you see in any hospital is hand sanitizer. But in the 1840s, suggesting a doctor should wash his hands was considered insanity. Enter Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor working in a Vienna maternity ward. He noticed a horrifying trend. Mothers delivered by doctors were dying of childbed fever, at a rate 3 times higher than mothers delivered by midwives. Semmelweis realized the doctors were performing autopsies on corpses in the morning, and then delivering babies in the afternoon without washing their hands. They were carrying cadaverous particles directly into maternity patients. He ordered doctors to wash their hands in a chlorine solution, and the death rate plummeted instantly. You'd think he'd be hailed as a hero. Instead, the medical community was offended. Doctors were gentlemen, and gentlemen's hands couldn't be dirty. He was ridiculed, fired, and eventually suffered a nervous breakdown. He was committed to an insane asylum, where, in a tragic twist of irony, He died of a blood infection, the very thing he had spent his life trying to prevent. Fact 8. The vampire disease. Before we understood germs, humans used folklore to explain disease. In New England during the 1800s, a terrifying outbreak of tuberculosis, then called consumption, led to a real-life vampire panic. Tuberculosis causes victims to waste away, cough up blood, and have receding gums that make their teeth look longer. When one family member died, and then another started showing the same symptoms, people didn't blame bacteria. They believed the first victim had become a vampire and was draining the life force of their relatives from the grave. To stop the vampire, desperate families would actually dig up their deceased relatives. If the body still looked somewhat preserved, which happens naturally in winter, they took it as proof of undeath. They would cut out the heart and burn it to stop the disease. The last known vampire exhumation in the US happened as recently as 1892 in Rhode Island. Fact 9. The World of Warcraft Plague. In 2005, epidemiologists, scientists who study diseases, turned their attention away from the real world and toward a video game. In the online game World of Warcraft, developers introduced a new boss whose attack, called Corrupted Blood, would slowly drain a player's health over time. It was supposed to stay in the boss's dungeon, but due to a programming glitch, players' virtual pets caught the disease and carried it out into the game's major cities. What happened next was a perfect simulation of a real pandemic. Lower-level players died instantly upon entering cities. Higher-level players acted as asymptomatic carriers, spreading the digital plague everywhere they went. Players fled cities in panic. Others acted like trolls, intentionally infecting others. The virtual world fell into chaos for a week until developers had to reset the servers. The incident was later used by real-world researchers to model human behavior during actual bioterrorism attacks. Fact number 10. The evolutionary trade-off. Sometimes, a disease is actually a defense mechanism against a worse disease. Malaria, carried by mosquitoes, has been one of humanity's biggest killers for thousands of years. In regions where malaria is rampant, like sub-Saharan Africa, humans evolved a strange defense. It's called the sickle cell trait. It's a genetic mutation that changes the shape of red blood cells. If you inherit this gene from both parents, you get sickle cell anemia, a painful and dangerous disease. But if you inherit it from only one parent, you don't get the disease, but your altered blood cells make it almost impossible for the malaria parasite to survive in your body. It is a brutal evolutionary bargain. Nature kept a genetic disease alive in the population because it was the only thing that stopped an even deadlier parasite. Fact 11. The disease that cooled the earth. Disease outbreaks don't just change human history, they can actually change the physical planet. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza that decimated roughly 90% of the indigenous population. That's about 55 million people dying in a very short span of time. This massive loss of human life had a strange environmental side effect. Millions of acres of farmland, previously cultivated by native populations, were suddenly abandoned. Nature reclaimed the land fast. Forests grew back over massive areas, and all those new trees pulled billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Scientists believe this sudden drop in CO2 contributed to the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that froze rivers in Europe and caused crop failures around the world. A biological tragedy in one hemisphere altered the climate of the entire globe. Fact 12. The forgotten pandemic of 1889. When we think of past pandemics, we usually think of the 1918 Spanish flu. But 30 years before that, the world was hit by the first true modern pandemic. It was called the Russian flu of 1889. It was modern because of how it traveled, by steam train and steamship. It started in Siberia and reached St. Petersburg in weeks. Thanks to the new railroad networks, it swept across Europe and reached America in just 70 days. It killed over 1 million people, including the heir to the British throne. But here is the twist. While it was called influenza, modern researchers looking at the symptoms, which included a loss of taste and smell, now believe it might not have been the flu at all. Some scientists argue that the 1889 pandemic was actually an early emergence of a human coronavirus, similar to the one we faced recently. Fact 13. The Laughing Death, Kuru. In the 1950s, researchers in the highlands of Papua New Guinea discovered a horrifying disease among the poor people. They called it Kuru, which means shaking. Victims would lose control of their limbs, suffer tremors, and eventually lose the ability to swallow. But most disturbingly, in the final stages, victims would burst into uncontrollable, spasmodic laughter before dying. It wasn't a virus or bacteria. It was a prion, a twisted infectious protein that turns the brain into a sponge. How was it spreading? Through funerary cannibalism. As a sign of respect and grief, the tribe would consume their deceased relatives. The women and children, who usually ate the brains of the deceased, were the ones most affected. Once the tribe stopped the practice in the 1960s, the disease slowly disappeared, proving that some pathogens can only survive through our most extreme cultural rituals. Fact 14. The armadillo connection. Leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, is one of the oldest diseases in human history, famously mentioned in the Bible. It causes nerve damage and skin lesions that can lead to severe disfigurement. We used to think it was purely a human disease. But in the 1970s, scientists discovered a shocking reservoir for the bacteria: the nine-banded armadillo. It turns out that armadillos have a naturally low body temperature, which is the perfect breeding ground for the leprosy bacteria, which dislikes high heat. In the southern United States, a significant percentage of wild armadillos carry the disease. While transmission to humans is rare, it does happen. So, if you see an armadillo in the wild, maybe don't pet it. Fact 15. The zombie bacteria in the ice. For our final fact, we aren't looking into the past, but into a worrying future. In 2016, in the remote Siberian tundra, a 12-year-old boy died and dozens of people were hospitalized with anthrax, a disease that hadn't been seen in the region for 75 years. Where did it come from? A heat wave had melted the permafrost, ground that has been frozen for millennia. The thaw exposed the carcass of a reindeer that had died of anthrax decades earlier. As the carcass thawed, the dormant anthrax spores woke up and released into the air and soil. As global temperatures rise and more permafrost melts, scientists are deeply worried about what else is trapped down there. We know that smallpox and the 1918 flu virus are buried in mass graves in the Arctic. The next great outbreak might not come from a wet market or a lab leak. It might just thaw out from history. From dancing plagues in the Middle Ages to zombie bacteria in the Arctic ice, the history of disease is stranger than fiction. Which of these facts shocked you the most? Let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weird world of biology, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next video.